Welcome in, Mason Voth, Alec Busse, Gabe Swartz here with you. Mason Voth of EMAW Online, Gabe Swartz kind of EMAW Online, and Alec Busse no longer of EMAW Online. He is, I guess, the leading man kind of at the Hoosier right now, and he is back in Big Ten country, ready to see what the Hoosiers have on tap. And sorry to any Indiana fans that listen to this, but probably just waiting on basketball season like the rest of you guys. It's okay. Every conference has that school. The Big 12, that's KU, even though they're actually looking forward to football this year because they've got irrational thoughts of winning at least 7 games. We'll see if that ends up happening. But we are brought back together one last time to discuss all the big moves that took place, finished up last week with realignment because it impacts all three of us in different ways. Number one, obviously, me covering a Big 12 school in K-State. They have been through quite the different scale of emotions over the last 3 years with this. And Alec now back in the Big Ten. His alma mater's in the Big Ten. He covers a school in the Big Ten. That is significant to them for different reasons, especially as one of the two power conferences in the term, what the word power actually means.
Super.
And then yeah, super. And then Gabe is covering this from a lot of different angles. He is in Big 12 country covering Big 12 teams now, whether it's for us at EMAW Online or for his TV job. But also, he has a very unique perspective on this because he is a graduate of one of the schools that is switching conferences and one that their administration is doing so reluctantly with Arizona State. So I think the proper way to kick this off is to get the thoughts of a man whose team just switched leagues and is coming to the Big 12 from the Pac-12.
Well, I keep going back to it being very bittersweet, and I also have admitted and have realized that I have alternative thoughts than most ASU fans in the sense that I think that as a collective fan base, most Arizona State alums and people who root for the Sun Devils have netted out at this was the right move and we kind of needed to make it happen. While most, I would say, are probably not the biggest fan of, they weren't rooting for this outcome. I would say I have an alternative perspective of just growing up in this area, rooting for and watching Big 12 basketball and football all the time for the last decade plus, really year in and year out. And so I kind of just parachuted into the Pac-12 life 4 or 5 years ago, I guess 5 years ago at this point. And I think that league greatly was disrespected. And I actually think, and we can have this conversation about who the big bad corporate college football media was rooting to die, whether it was the Pac-12 or whether it was the Big 12. And I actually think that there should be some unity here because I think both groups have been persecuted and have had their fair share of struggles. The Pac-12 was a very entertaining product, whether it produced national championship caliber teams or not, year in and year out. You couldn't, whether it was because the play was good or whether the play was bad, you couldn't turn your eyes away from the car wreck. And if you were turning your eyes away, then you were ignorant. And there were a lot of ignorant people. And so that's part of why the Pac-12 has died. And it saddens me because I think the Pac-12 was great. I think that what makes college football and college basketball and college athletics in general great is regionality. And I think there are a lot of people living in glass houses on the East Coast rooting for the upper Midwest and the southeastern portion of the nation to completely control this mechanism. And because of that, we've gotten to a point where it looks like we're only going to have 4 conferences. And that was probably the end all be all, but it sucks. And I think that it just is terrible that the Pac-12 is gone. But ASU and Arizona fit very well culturally. Colorado obviously fits well culturally. And Utah had only been in the league for a little over a decade. So I don't think that any of these schools are like losing their identity, even though Michael Crow is having an identity crisis. So I will cede the floor back to you guys. And if you'd like more takes on Michael Crow, I can provide them as someone who has spent 5 minutes in an elevator at the Rose Bowl with him like 4 years ago.
That's a long elevator ride.
Those elevators are slow, Alec.
Well,
that's that experience. But I'm very excited for the short drives to whether it's Lawrence or Manhattan to watch ASU play. I could even go to Ames and see them play reasonably. Stillwater makes sense from here. And I'm pumped that they will be here for the Big 12 tournament, at least until 2027. After that, I'm pretty sure Brett's trying to get this thing to Vegas. So
yeah, well, yeah, Brett Yormark, he is a winner in this right now, but I have reservations on him long term as a conference commissioner, because what I will say is this: like, there are people that want to kick him and whatever, and wanted to discount him from the get go. Brett Yormark, for this first year in the short term, is the right guy for the job in the Big 12. He saved the Big 12, and he brought them out better than what they could have been on the other side of this, because 2021, out of nowhere, a week after Bob Bowlesby says at Big 12 Media Days, we're as united as we've ever been, boom, OU and Texas are gone. And so that starts the Big 12 scrambling. Well, in addition to that, then Bob Bowlesby's like, I'm getting too old for this shit, and decides that he's going to hang it up, and the Big 12 has to go out and find somebody. And I give Brett Yormark credit for this. The man had a job with the Brooklyn Nets, with Rock Nation, with all these big-time entities, and he said, hey, I was interested in the college landscape and being involved in it, and for him to leave that stuff behind and take this Big 12 commissioner job, he deserves credit for that, and he came in and in conjunction with Bowlesby, helped deliver the 4 schools that helped stabilize the Big 12. Those schools are basically meaningless to the league right now. Houston adds value in basketball, but as we know, basketball doesn't bring in the money. Like, that's not what this is about. It's nice to have some of those. BYU is probably the most valuable brand out of those 4. But now that you landed the 4 corner schools, that's significant. But Yormark helped do that, and he fought off the Pac-12 in this process to some extent, because I've got a thought on that. And then also naysayers in the media, and why I think that, he kind of fought off the Pac-12. The Pac-12 could have totally avoided this problem and been what the Big 12 is right now if George Kliavkoff had made moves and taken Big 12 schools and brought them in. Maybe you still lose USC and UCLA, but if you add in schools from the Big 12 that in 2021 would have gladly jumped, if you had come to basically any of them in August of 2021, you could have had your pick of the litter, and the Big 12 would have been the league that dissolved and dried up immediately. But he didn't. And instead, what he kept doing was acting holier than thou and decided, hey, we're going to be fine. We're going to be able to do this just however we want it, whatever, and didn't extend a lifeline to the Big 12. And to me, the start of, George Kliavkoff's first act of war against the Big 12 was when he goes in and does the whole alliance thing with the Big 10 and ACC, because that right there was a very clear signal to the Big 12 that, oh, we're leaving you for dead. We don't care about you right now. Because if you felt like the SEC was gaining all that power, then the 4 conferences that have autonomy left over should have been involved in that. It would not have killed you to add another conference that's right in the middle of the country to be a part of your alliance. And they didn't, basically signaling, hey, whatever. And you move on from that. Brett Yormark gets in. He says, hey, we got to jump the line for this TV deal. He did that. It was obviously a smart move. It left the Pac-12 scrambling. And that's really what started this domino the third time around, is that this TV deal that George Kliavkoff was having to hunt for, number one, the standard TV networks didn't want it anymore because they think they've given out enough money at this point in time. They've got their product they need. And the Pac-12 didn't hold as much value without USC and UCLA. And he also wanted to kind of go the non-traditional route and was diving into the streaming. And if you look at how those numbers were going to stack up, the Pac-12 was going to have to sell an ungodly amount of subscriptions on Apple TV to get to the number that the Big 12 had. And if they wanted to surpass it even more. And if you look at what Apple TV has done for other sports packages, like I think the MLS season pass what I've seen, they think that they're at like 800,000 to 1 million subscribers right now, but they also can't tell you how many of those come with people's season ticket packages, how many are being given out for free through like mobile carriers. And so there just wasn't anything there for them to do. And I think Brett Yormark did a good job of getting ahead of all this. And he realized that safety is better than making any risks in this time to have better financial gain. And it paid off for the Big 12 when Colorado got fed up with George Kliavkoff continuously lying to them basically and saying, hey, deal's coming. We got this going. It never came. They jumped, and that created further instability. And that was really Colorado's whole purpose in this. Colorado, there's no financial gain in adding Colorado right now, except for the fact that you were able to pull that last Jenga block, and that was the final one that did the Pac-12 in, because then Oregon and Washington saw, okay, whatever, they explored the Big Ten deeper. And once those two were going, then you knew that the other three and the four corners were going to have to find a new home as well. So Brett Yormark did the best that he can. And to tie this in one last time from the Big 12 angle, he is good in this moment. Long term, though, a guy like him may not be the fit to be a commissioner of a college conference, because that's not his background. Obviously, we see that with the Mexico series that's going to come up. We don't know how that's going to work out. But also, like Gabe alluded to, the Big 12 basketball tournament should not leave Kansas City ever. We know this. Even when you had 12 schools in the league and half of them were residing in Texas and Oklahoma, the Big 12 basketball tournament was not as successful and did not feel as big of an event when it was in Dallas or Oklahoma City. It has to be in Kansas City. That is its home. You have arguably your three most passionate basketball fan bases that are going to travel right there in KU, K-State, and Iowa State. It's an easy drive for them. They support it really well. And then, I just think I've likened it to, schools, they hire their superintendents, and each superintendent is meant for something different. You have like the lifer in education that is there, that is meant to just bring stability during basically a time of peace. You're not looking to get a bond issue done. You're not looking for this. Like, you just have everything set for you. It's going to be a nice and easy 10 years. But you could have a school district that is looking to take over a pretty big overhaul with, hey, we need new buildings. We need a new football field. We need all this. And you need to pass that bond issue. You have to bring in a guy that knows how to do that. And you have to bring in a hired gun. And that guy may only be there for 2 or 3 years, but he's going to come in, deliver, and then hand it off to somebody that can handle the stability aspect of it. And I think that that's probably something that the Big 12 in a few years should probably explore or think about with Brett Yormark is, okay, we appreciate what you did for us, but the big ideas you have are kind of going to tire on us and may make us a little bit more wobbly than we want. We need somebody to come in more like a Bob Bowlesby, who had that experience as an athletic director at all these schools and worked in administration in college sports before. But that's the Big 12 aspect of this and what Brett Yormark was able to do to kind of keep things together. Alec, from an Illinois grad perspective and a guy that's covering Indiana, your schools are set. They are not moving. They're fine, but they're going to get the added benefit of 4 new schools that bring a lot of value, that are exciting opponents. It's going to add a little bit more travel, but what do you make of this for the Big Ten, and how do you see it from your perspective?
Yeah, well, first of all, I kind of want to comment real quick on something you said about Brett Yormark that I fully agree with. And I think what really kind of led to this entire round of conference consolidation, which is kind of what I'm leaning towards calling it now instead of realignment. I think Brett Yormark I don't think there's enough credit that Brett Yormark should get for a couple of things in relation to the Big 12's new media rights deal with ESPN and Fox. One, he was able to jump the line and start negotiations well before they were supposed to. And that allowed them to go to the table and negotiate with Fox and ESPN. And I think one area where he was masterful is having an accurate understanding of what his value was and not trying to compare what his brands were and what he could offer to what the Big Ten and the SEC could offer. And I understand that most of the listeners here are going to be Big 12 based, but the value of those brands aren't the same as what exists in the Big Ten or the SEC from a football perspective. And I know that that can be sometimes tough to hear. And that's just kind of the reality of it. But I think Brett Yormark deserves a ton of credit for going to the negotiation table with Fox and ESPN and having an accurate understanding of what his brands were. And then also negotiating within that contract to leave open the door for expansion for Power 5 programs and bring them in as fully vested members starting in 2024, 2025. Because to me, that showed that he had a even deeper understanding of what the market was saying and where the finances for networks like Fox and ESPN was, and kind of probably knowing that CBS and NBC probably didn't have a huge interest in expanding their broadcast interests to the Pac-12 because they were already signed up with the Big Ten. And understanding that there might just not have been enough money out there for the Pac-12 or another conference to get a media rights package that was satisfactory to their members. And he did that and expanded the Big 12 with the most prominent brands from the Pac-12 that aren't going to the Big Ten. Now, from a Big Ten's perspective, adding Oregon and Washington, it certainly helps the Big Ten on the football field. I mean, you're adding two programs who actually have been to the college football playoff. Obviously, we know USC and UCLA are bigger brand names, but guys, neither one of those programs have actually played in the CFP. Now, I know USC was basically a win away last year, maybe a Caleb Williams hamstring injury against Utah in the Pac-12 title game away from playing in a playoff.
If he just hadn't painted his fingernails, he would have played a little bit better.
Well, and the thing with adding Oregon and Washington, in my opinion, is that like there's a lot of changes that are going to come with it. The Big Ten had already announced a scheduling model for 2024, 2025. That's going to be thrown out the window. And one thing that I find really funny, and Gabe, I think that this will segue well into some of your thoughts on it, and just from our text conversations, is I find it hilarious that the Big Ten was like, we don't want to be the one that deals the death blow to the Pac-12. And for all intents and purposes, that's like shooting the guy and saying, I didn't shoot him, and handing the gun off to the man to your left, right? Like they killed the Pac-12.
No. It's shooting the guy, and then it's handing the gun to the guy to your left, and then saying, shoot his friend.
Sure, yeah. That's a better way to say. Like you for all intents and purposes killed the Pac-12 when you took USC and UCLA. Now, I will also say this from a Big Ten perspective. I don't have an issue with the Big Ten responding to the Texas and Oklahoma move that the SEC made, because that was inevitable. Like, I don't blame them for making that move, but don't act like you didn't kill the Pac-12 when you took USC and UCLA. And then further, don't say you want to be the one to kill the Pac-12 by leaking that to various national press members across the country, and then be the one to actually kill them for good when you take Oregon and Washington before the three other corner four schools, Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah, officially go to the Big 12. Because the Big Ten literally killed the Pac-12. And I think that that's just really unfortunate for college sports. And it's no secret between the three of us that, like, I greatly enjoyed watching the Pac-12. Gabe obviously greatly enjoyed it. And to be fully honest with you guys, like, my enjoyment of the Pac-12 grew a ton last year, living alone in Manhattan, Kansas, and not having stuff to watch late at night. Like, I'm someone who's up late at night, and I greatly enjoyed coming home on a Saturday after covering a K-State game at Bill Snyder Family Stadium against whoever, and being able to stay up until 2:00 watching whatever Pac-12 game was on, or spending my Thursday nights up until 1:30 watching whatever Pac-12 game was on and texting in group chats about it. Like, that's gone. And I think that that's really sad for college sports. But at the same time, I think we can all agree that it's hard to not get excited about some of the future matchups that are going to be happening in the Big Ten, SEC. And for me, even personally, I think the new Big 12 is going to be incredibly fascinating to watch from a football perspective, because I don't know if there's one dominant program that's going to rise to the top in that league.
But you know what? The contrarian in me, and the, like, what the hell are you guys thinking nationally, is like everybody who was like, oh, the Pac-12 never has a national title contender. Oh, the Pac-12, nobody's ever going to the playoff. Like, all these types of things. I know that the new college football playoff mechanism and, like, system and whatever is going to get bids for all the conference champions, probably going to move down to 5 best conference champs and then 7 at large instead of 6 and 6. But, like, the new Big 12 is going to be what the Pac-12 was. Like, it's going to be extremely competitive. There's going to be, because I understand that USC brand wise was the top dog, but in terms of, like, executing on that brand, they were Texas level of incompetent under Clay Helton.
The last decade. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And Steve
because of that,
Sarkisian, who, by the way, Texas decided, hey, that's our guy. That's the guy that's right for us.
exactly.
So, yeah.
But because they were
To be fair, real quick on that, no one was going to have success at USC at that time because of the NCAA violations. Like Lane Kiffin got slammed there because of the violations, and whoever was going to get hired after Kiffin wasn't going to have success either because the violations were still hanging over their
if
head.
they just hired Coach O like they were supposed to, who knows how things
Yeah,
turned
that
out.
worked out great for LSU long
But
term.
They did national championship.
That's what the new Big 12 is going to eat itself alive. I don't know. There's just, if you look at recruiting rankings, there's very little chance that any of those teams is going to recruit at a great enough level that there will ever be a talent disparity that leads to one overwhelmingly dominant team. And so if you get through a season in the Big 12 undefeated, you're probably going to look a lot like that TCU team did last year, where it's like, oh, they could have lost to Baylor. Oh, they could have lost to K-State. Oh, they could have lost at KU. Like all these different games that they played, they could have lost, and then they wouldn't even have ended up there. There's not going to be these dominant teams. So it's going to be an entertaining product. It's going to be one of the best leagues to watch week in, week out. You're not going to be able to be like, oh, like Cincinnati, West Virginia, that doesn't seem like a great game. Well, it still should be entertaining. ASU, Arizona should be a fun game, even if Arizona is a terrible football program, which objectively they are at the moment.
Hey, they're rising, baby. They got a 5-star commitment.
Who cares? So that's my whole point, is like everything that people in the Midwest and the East Coast ragged on is in terms of showing their East Coast and Midwest bias against not wanting to stay up late at night because not everybody's built like Alec. That is what the Big 12
built different, I guess.
So that like in my heart of hearts bothers me, is that everything that people said that they hated about the Pac-12, like, is what the Big 12 from a football product is going to become.
Yeah.
Especially if Yormark starts doing Friday night games and sending good teams on the road on short weeks. You are going to lose. Like, that's what they did to Oregon. That's what they did to Washington. Those teams that had playoff chances, they got sent into. Stanford had this happen too. Stupid scheduling stuff. Don't do that, Brett.
I think,
to be fair,
the
Big Ten offer Friday night games.
Yeah, but what Ohio State plays theirs like week 1 every year. Like,
yes,
when is Michigan
it's
play?
Your lower level. It's your lower level.
That's the thing. Like this year, we see it in the Big 12. I think there are 5 or 6 Thursday or Friday games being played, and the very first one in conference play, K-State is at Oklahoma State on a Friday night, like the first or second weekend in October. I think TCU plays one of those Friday games. Now, given theirs might be against Oklahoma on like the day after Thanksgiving, so a little different there. The one thing this year that at least K-State has the benefit of, same for Oklahoma State, is they get their bye week just after that. But also the sake of the bye week kind of is negated when it's just 4 weeks into the season, other than you're getting this extra time to prepare for a Friday game. But that's one of those things that they're going to have to do. And I think like it's a good point by both of you. Like TCU this past year, they went undefeated in the regular season, but they did it by the skin of their teeth. And basically every Big 12 game except for Oklahoma, who they blew out, and Iowa State. That's basically it, because KU was a tight game all the way through, and there was no scoring in the first half. Second half, it blew up. They won by a touchdown. They won in double overtime against Oklahoma State by 3. The K-State game, they were down at halftime, and if Chris Tennant makes a kick or Will Howard isn't the second quarterback to go down and Jake Rubley doesn't have to come in and take one brutal quarterback sneak, like that game could be different. And you just keep going down. Like West Virginia battled with them, and they got the 10-point lead, I think, with a garbage time touchdown at the end where Duggan just threw up a prayer. I think I won a bet or something on that one.
I lost a bet on that.
Yeah, that was our picks this week. I got the cover on that one for the Frogs. Tech, they beat by 10. They had a little bit of breathing room there, but it wasn't, it was never over. Texas, they won by a touchdown. Baylor, the last second field goal, and then obviously they lost in OT at the Big 12 championship to K-State. So they basically had the perfect season go through this version of the Big 12. And the one benefit that you will have, I guess, in this new league, and all these leagues with 16 teams or more, is you could get a schedule that looks really nice and just works out in your favor, but it's going to be total luck of the draw most years, because you're not going to predict like, oh, this team's going to be really bad or whatever. It's just going to be how it works out.
Just like this year.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen it. The Big 12 is at 14 teams this year. The Big 10 has been at 14 teams. The SEC, same type of deal. The way their scheduling format had worked out is if you were in the SEC East and you had some pretty weak like SEC West opponents for your cross-division play, you could get there with a pretty, like Missouri when they first got into the SEC, those teams were playing in SEC championship games. Like, and
now
they still weren't bad. They were fine.
It used to be it's flipped.
Yeah,
but
it used to be the East, but like Missouri lucked out, and other teams have been the beneficiary. And then they get there in that championship game, and whether it's Alabama or LSU, they're getting their butts kicked because they're just not good enough. But their schedule afforded them that, and so depending on what you get, the Big 12 could very easily see in their future the 2 or 3 best teams aren't playing in the title game because maybe they had a tougher schedule, and you see the 4th team go through and they waltz to a, maybe it's your boy Kenny down in Tempe, and they get a nice cushy schedule, and all of a sudden the Devils are playing for the Big 12 championship. Like, it's a possibility. So
let me
those things.
Let me just ask the question bluntly to either one of you guys. In the 12-team playoff model, do you think there's ever one of the future 16 Big 12 members that plays for a national championship?
No.
I don't think there is either. And I could go even further.
Okay. Wait. Slow the roll.
I don't think any of the future 16 programs in the Big 12 will play for a national championship.
In the national championship game?
Yeah, I don't think it'll ever happen.
Means they're going to have to win 2 games.
Okay, well, I wouldn't say ever, because at some point the deck has to get reshuffled again. And
in the current model that we are expecting to have, whether it's the 6-6, like you mentioned earlier, or it gets reduced down to 5-7 or 4-8, whatever it is, like, I don't think that there's a path for a Big 12 team to, like Mason said, play for the national championship because of the talent disparity between those programs. And I know that TCU beat Michigan, right? Like in the semifinal, but you can beat Michigan in and you can beat Michigan in the quarterfinals if you're TCU. But now that means you might have to play Alabama.
You can get lucky once,
but you're not going to get
likelihood of getting lucky a second time, because
you don't have to get lucky to be, if you're like the 4 seed, you don't have to get lucky to beat the 5.
But you have to get lucky to beat another team twice.
Yeah.
No, but here's the thing. If somebody goes undefeated in the Big 12 and they are a top 4 seed, then they get a bye, and then they can get a game against one of the not talent, like complete dominant, you know what I mean, programs. Like
you're going to match up with it, or you're going to match up with like 10-2 Alabama.
Okay, if you run into 10-2 Alabama, yeah, you're probably screwed. Of course.
I think
we saw the Big 12 champ
Bama
go up against 10-3 Bama this year or something.
Whole game changes if Will Howard hits Ben.
Well, that's true. I mean, no. Hey, real quick, just so everybody's aware of this, when Deuce Vaughn ripped off the touchdown run, Alec turns to me and says, "This game might be over. I don't think they care. I don't think they want to be here." And I was like, it's like 10 minutes to go in the second quarter. I'm not gonna agree to that yet.
I will say such a thing.
Every time that game, because the SEC network, it plays that over and over again with the Liberty Bowl from this year, and I will always watch it up until the Deuce touchdown run, and then I know, all right, I don't need to see any more of this game. Like, I can turn it off right now. But it's always fun to see him rip that off, and there was some belief there for a minute. But I maybe the Big 12 champ can get there, and it's certainly possible, like, that one of these teams could be put together. Like we've seen in like the BCS era, a team that doesn't have what you would consider national championship caliber talent have the actual level and talent ability to win a national title. Like, I will use 2012 K-State as an example. That was a team there that on paper outside of Arthur Brown at linebacker, who was, top recruit in the country coming out of Wichita East and ended up at Miami before transferring to K-State, nobody else on that roster really, you look at it and go, oh, that guy, that's the dude that's on a national championship caliber team. But K-State had a Heisman finalist quarterback in Colin Klein that, yes, Colin Klein, not a good quarterback in the normal sense of the word, but he is a great college quarterback. And if you have one of those, you have a chance. And they had obviously Tyler Lockett on the roster as a sophomore, like under-recruited guy that had the bloodlines. His dad and uncle were K-State greats. He came to K-State. He built himself into it. Like, you can get lucky and have that happen, but the likelihood of it, I think, is very low. And like TCU this year makes me think of this. Like, they had a lot of that, and they had even more NFL talent than that K-State team had in 2012. But it took some fluky, lucky plays to beat Michigan, even though I thought they could beat Michigan. The likelihood of them being able to do that a second time to get to a national title, I just don't know that it would happen unless there was something else to happen. Like, it could be like college basketball where maybe that Alabama team this year, where every fifth game they played, they throw up a clunker and anybody could kind of sneak up and beat them that's decent. And so if you catch them on the right night, you could get past them. And so then maybe you get a TCU, and their second matchup to get to the championship after beating a Michigan is somebody, I don't know, like Florida State gets in there. Like, Florida State going to be a fine team, but they're not world beaters. You're not fearful of them like Georgia or Alabama right now. And so maybe that could happen. But I'm more so with Alec on this, that I just realistically don't see it happening. And honestly, like, if you're in any league outside of the Big Ten and SEC, but more realistically, like, you could throw in a couple of those ACC schools if they get it figured out, but more likely than not, our national champions for a long time to come are going to come from the Big Ten or SEC.
Well, and let me kind of transition this back to realignment and away from, I guess, the on-field implications of it. And this kind of transitions well, in my opinion, is I think that this is one of the sad parts of the realignment effects of this, is that did Washington, that's not a good example. Did UCLA actually have a chance to win a national championship in football? No, probably not. Does Texas Tech have a chance to win a national championship in college football? No. TCU, they lost 65-7. Like, they got there, right? But like, they were never going to beat Georgia. And the score of that game is a perfect example of why.
Well, I think we have two, real quick. I think we have two examples of this. Is K-State and TCU, the two best teams from the Big 12 this year, played the two best teams from the SEC this year. And they're both, Chris Kleiman and Sonny Dykes, obviously know what they're doing as football coaches. And what both of them decided, we have to do everything we possibly can to be aggressive and try to win this game every single play. We can't play conservative at all if we want to do this. And it didn't work out. Obviously for TCU, it didn't work out in a big way. For K-State, it was just a few little things that if they convert, it does maybe change the game a little bit more. But they still got their butts kicked by those two schools. And I think that's the one thing that we could see. Like, Cincinnati played it kind of conservative when they played Alabama in the Cotton Bowl, and they made their semifinal, and they didn't get totally run out of the building. They kept it,
Alabama
somewhat
slowed up though,
but they never had a chance to actually win that. K-State made plays, gave themselves a chance, and that's what TCU tried to do. But they just didn't have enough overall, because you have to be 100% basically on your execution, and you couldn't be. So I think we've seen that already, where these schools that are going up against the great ones, where there's this disparity, they know that they have to try everything they can, and you'll get a 65-7, because I don't think that's actually indicative of how much better Georgia is than TCU, but it shows, what it does show is that TCU knew they have to do a lot of these things to win the game, and the two outcomes that could have happened in that were TCU wins the game or they get beat 65-7.
But here's the thing that bothers me the most out of all of this is that you essentially have 5 children, right? You've got all the 5 Power 5 conferences, and you've got the NCAA, which is the equivalent of an absent father, like literally has just left the house, has not paid any attention to what's going on. And then they show up back and they're like, let's cash some checks and let's make sure that, oh, did Billy like put his clothes away? Did he fold his laundry and put them on the, like, And that's the equivalent of like the minor infractions that they'll come in and then they'll spank them for. And like, that's all the NCAA does. And they don't think about the fact that like, hey, it doesn't make any logical sense to have a national college football product that we would like to have some representation from around the country. And then we create this tribalism not even tribalism between fan bases. We create a tribalism between conferences in selling their media rights to
Which
the point
is so
that it's gotten
stupid.
to a point where we don't have, like, it's just not even equitable. Like, that is the thing that
Like, you
bothers
have
me
Big
most.
Ten fans, and I can say this as someone who grew up watching the Big Ten and has covered the Big Ten for a majority of my career. Big Ten fans respond to the SEC's claims of winning all the national championships in college football basically since the start of the BCS. What, 17? Is that what it is? I don't know, if 13, 17, I don't remember what it is
was
off
14.
the top of my head. With, okay, well, we make more money than you. Our media rights deal is bigger than yours. That is so stupid. Who cares? You don't see any of the money. Your schools aren't getting that much better because of the money. Like, I cover Indiana football now, right? Do I think that Indiana football is going to get better than Florida State football because they make $70 million annually and Florida State is currently slated to make like $34 million annually from media rights? No, I don't. I actually have zero belief in the world that Indiana is going to get better than Florida State at football because they're just innate resources that Florida State has in their backyard in comparison to Indiana, or even my alma mater, Illinois, or Purdue, or Minnesota. Like, I think it's so stupid that college sports fans care about the media rights distributions between the conferences. It's so stupid, and it means nothing. What matters in college sports is the regionality of it, and making every fan base feel like they can go to their game, go to their school, their alma mater, the school closest to them on a Saturday, and feel like they have a chance to win that Saturday. There's nothing in America that brings together a large group of people more than college football in terms of the athletic sphere. Nothing fills a large area in America more than a college football stadium, and that includes the NFL. And that's gone now.
That's why I felt icky. Like, as an ASU guy, I felt icky being like, we have to move to the Big 12. And it wasn't because of the media. Like, I feel like I can say it wasn't because of the media rights. It was because being left behind meant you weren't a part of the competitive level, the highest competitive level. And even as we just discussed, being in the Big 12 probably isn't really giving you the best chance.
It gives you the illusion that you're in it. And this is what my point has always been when I've talked realignment is I didn't want this to get to the point where there was a very realistic possibility that the Big Ten and SEC became their own thing. And I tried to explain this time and time again to the guy that I hosted a show with here in Wichita, where I said, look, you're much different. You did not go to a Division I school. I know you say you're a Nebraska fan, but you don't have the same like level of get into it. Like, you're not in Lincoln every Saturday. I'm in Manhattan every Saturday. And the way that I watch college football is I watch Kansas State, number one. My alma mater, the school I cover, they are number one. Number two, I don't give a crap if Michigan and Ohio State are playing. If TCU is playing Oklahoma State to decide who goes to the Big 12 title game, I'm watching TCU Oklahoma State. I'm watching K-State and then the Big 12. And then after that, I will find a national game that is appealing to me if I want to. And I understand that you have to have the broader appeal. That is why the Big Ten and SEC are, they are bigger right now. Number one, they have the bigger fan bases too, and are in areas also that, like the South, the only thing they have is college football. And I get that, but they also, they have these big products now. They will get the general fan base to watch them more often than not. But you also couldn't be erased from that. And my fear is that the Big Ten and SEC would become their own thing. And then that leaves the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 in with another group of people. And the top two split off and they do their own thing. And guess what? I would have zero interest in watching that level of football again. Like, maybe I'd catch it occasionally, but it's fun to be able to be at the same level. You feel connected to them. So I am more likely to watch a Michigan-Ohio State game because I feel like in some small way, it is connected to my school. It's connected to my conference, because what happens between Mississippi State and LSU to decide who finishes second or third in the SEC, it matters in some way to the Big 12. And I didn't want college football to get to a place where it was so fractured and so segmented that we had the top 2 in the Big Ten and the SEC, and then a little bit of a drop off where we had 3 or 4 conferences in the middle, then the group of 5 schools, and then FCS. Like, it's just too much, and you would fragment people even more than what you already have in the sports landscape. And we've seen, like, the Mountain West is not producing schools that are flirting with getting into the playoff or the BCS anymore. Now, they lost 2 of them, TCU and Utah, but Boise State was still there. Boise State has not mattered in football for a decade now. And Boise State, that is a fan base that probably feels like they got left behind. I can guarantee you that is a fan base that watches way less Big Ten, SEC, Big 12 football now than what they did back in 2011 when Kellen Moore was there and giving them a chance. Like, things have just changed, and I just didn't want my school to be left out on that. Gabe obviously didn't want his school to be left out on it, and I think that we are fortunately to a place where that's not going to happen, and enough of the big-time decision makers realize that probably isn't good for college football. But I think it did take a lot of this realignment in motion to make sure that that's not what the outcome was. And that was my biggest concern in all this. And so for the fact that we avoided that, I'm totally okay with it. If K-State had to leave the Big 12 and it was the Big 12 that dissolved, it would be sad. But ultimately at the time, I would have been on my knees praying and thanking the Lord that K-State isn't going to be left out of this new world of college football, like the 4 leftover schools in the Pac-12 feel right now, because I feel for Washington State and Oregon State. Like, it sucks. And they are in this exact position that I was scared that I might be in, or other Big 12 schools might be in. And that's not a great spot to be in. And I hope the best for them, but also in hoping the best for them, I don't want the Big 12 to be the league that gives the best for them, because they don't deserve it. And it's not going to help the Big 12 at all, because this is about the money at this point.
It's wild to me that, like, there's a very real chance that, like, Cal does not have a football program in the next 10 years. And we're going to look back and be like, Marshawn Lynch went there. Aaron Rodgers went there. Like, Mitchell Schwartz went there. Like, Cam Jordan went there, and they don't play football anymore. And that is indicative of, like, how neglected and how often the West Coast has been told that football, their football doesn't matter as much. And because of that, yeah, like, some of the fan bases aren't as big. And I'm pumped that ASU's in a conference now that football matters to people. Like, football is what people care about on Saturdays in Manhattan. It's what people care about on Saturdays in Ames. And for a lack of a better, like, phrasing, it's what people care about in Lawrence, even when they suck. Like, people want to be good at football. If there's bad,
every school is a football school.
Yeah, everybody's a football school until they're not. You know what I mean? Like, until they're truly not a football school. So I think that's exciting. But you can rag on George Kliavkoff, and I will actually provide some sympathy for him.
Me too.
When you work for, when you are a commissioner, you are only as good as your presidents will allow you to be. And he was held back so much by presidents like Michael Crow, who were so snobby and so elite and so into their academia buddies that I've been told that Michael Crow thought that it was best for ASU to always be aligned and in a conference academically with Stanford and Cal. Now, you two, who I'm sure the first conversation that you guys had with me when I said I went to ASU was like, oh, what a great party school. That's the brand, right? Every time I've ever teed it up on a golf course with a random person and they've said, where'd you go to college? And I said, ASU. They're like, oh, what a party school. And whether it's true or not, whether the brand has gotten different or not, whether factually the academic realm of ASU has gotten better, which since he took over, yes, credit to Michael Crow, the academics of ASU have actually gotten better.
Gabe's got a good degree now,
according to U.S. News. That is true. But when you live in academia and all your buddies are telling you this, you have a false sense of reality. And so Michael Crow, I don't even know who the president of Utah was, but him and the AD there thought that they were best academically in the Pac-12 until USC and UCLA bolted for the Big Ten. They thought the same thing. Washington and Oregon thought the same thing in terms of being there. Like, ideally, they all wanted to stay together. And so if I'm painting it in like the best light possible, I can say that if you want to empathize or think about best case scenario is that the Pac-12 kept saying no to the Big 12, not because they thought they were elite, which I think they did, but because they didn't want to kill a conference and they wanted it to just stay the way they were. Now, that was probably not in touch with reality, not able in terms of, for guys who think they were pretty innovative, not very innovative of them. And sadly, if they had just purged the Big 12 when they had the chance, when the Big 12 was vulnerable because they lost Oklahoma and Texas, they could have had KU. They could have had KU basketball. They could have had K-State, which is a solid brand. And realistically, the schools that wanted to come but were told no because secular universities, they could have had TCU. Imagine how much better the Pac-12 footprint looks last year if you know that next year TCU football is coming in and they just make this run, or Baylor basketball is coming in and they've been on the come up. But because these schools were too snobby for it, it didn't happen. So I honestly feel bad for Kliavkov because I know that he had so many ardent supporters, just like Crow, who is like your grandpa, who's like, can you imagine this technology? Like the Apple TV stuff. The best thing he could say on Saturday was that with one touch of a button, you can have it on your phone. Like, dude, download the YouTube TV app.
Every other league does that now.
I'll go further than this in defending George Kliavkov, and I don't want it to come off as like I'm a defender of him because he is definitely at fault for some of this. Yes. But I kind of think he was just put behind the 8 ball from the get-go, and I think more blame deserves to be put on former Pac-12 commissioner Larry Scott. Yeah. When he got to the Pac-12, and Gabe, you'll be able to give more light to this than I will be because you covered the Pac-12 under his reign, but he signed at the time, I believe, the richest sports media contract at the time with the Pac-12. And that obviously is, I think, the current one that is finishing, but he deserves credit for doing that. But think about all the other mess of situations that Larry Scott led in the Pac-12, having the establishment of Pac-12 network and not partnering with a Fox or an ESPN to allow it to be sent across the country and paying for that. That's millions and millions of dollars to do. Having your conference headquarters in San Francisco in a massive high rise because it looks cool and it looks pompous. And spending the rent to do that it's a waste of money. And those are off the field situations. I mean, about a decade ago, the Big Ten wanted to have a scheduling agreement or scheduling alliance, not to use the alliance term, a scheduling agreement with the Pac-12 for not just football, but all sports. Imagine if that existed in the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. We're really close to announcing something along those lines. And the Pac-12 saying, no, actually, we're not going to do that. That would be great for college football if those two conferences were doing that.
When you were in school or still, did the Pac-12 have like a basketball scheduling series with anybody? Like we've got the Big 12 SEC, we have the Gavitt games, we have the Big 10 ACC. Now they're going to do it with the SEC. Was there any of that? Because I remember back in the day, the Big 12 Pac-12 hardwood series, that was a thing. K-State played Washington State and Oregon, and that was there, but I have not heard of that in a while. So like that just goes to show that what Alec is saying, that they weren't even doing that for something like basketball where it's really easy to do. You play 15 non-con games.
Well, they were. They signed an agreement to play games with the SWAC, which is why ASU had a home-and-home with Texas Southern and lost at Texas Southern last year.
And to be fair, there is some.
To be fair, Bobby Hurley scheduled
real quick. Hey, not to bring politics into this, that is the most Pac-12 liberal thing ever. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, to be fair, though, I do think it's harder for the Pac-12 to do something like that because, like Gabe always says, they're on the West Coast and people didn't want to travel out there for games. Now that looks really stupid in hindsight because the Big Ten is now adding conference members that are on the West Coast. So that's just
for football. I could see it, but like basketball, I think those schools are cool with it. If you give them, think of how many tournaments are in Vegas now, Maui. I mean,
USC
K-State went out to Cal.
Maryland is going out to UCLA this year in a non-conference game, and UCLA was at Maryland last year for a non-conference game.
I don't know. I think you're right there, Alec. Like they had opportunities to show that they could figure this out, and they just didn't grow.
Here's the other thing.
Okay, go ahead.
One quick thing to continue the Larry Scott and like where the Pac-12 went wrong in the last decade. It also went wrong in just the fact that the level of play in the league decreased dramatically because, like Gabe said earlier, USC struggled post-sanction era with Clay Helton and Steve Sarkisian and Lane Kiffin. Oregon was only able to make it to the playoff in the first year. Stanford never made it to the playoff, even though they were really, really good under Jim Harbaugh and under David Shaw up until the last 4 or 5 years.
David Shaw was a fraud.
Washington made it to the playoff in 2016, but like they like their overall quality of play decreased. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm sure Gabe can enlighten more of those reasons.
Well, the quality of play decreased because so many Southeastern schools and East Coast schools and Big Ten schools were able to just walk into California and tell kids, like, even if you stay at home, nobody's going to be able to watch. Your parents aren't going to be able to watch your games because nobody can see the Pac-12 network. Like at its very, very most basic point, this is just like a psychological thing. If I tell you that something is awesome, but then I hide it from you and I never let you see it, you're just going to tell me, oh, you're full of crap. And like, that's what the Pac-12 network was. We had games and we were like, this is a great game. You really want to see this game. Oh yeah, but only like 15% of households in the US can watch it. Now believe me, that's what we were doing. We were just trying to sell people on a bag of goods, and not even we. It was Larry Scott and it was George Glavkov now. And George was just taking over from Larry. That's the thing, is like, yeah, Larry signed a great media rights deal in terms of pure money from ESPN and Fox, like at the time. But in terms of his own conference network, like that
maybe the biggest misstep of a conference commissioner in the history of college.
There's no maybe. It is by far the biggest misstep by a conference commissioner ever.
Yeah, and that is impressive because, I mean, Dan Beebe, he let Texas go ahead and get the Longhorn Network, and that's what cost the Big 12 4 schools to begin with.
Well, and that's also what cost the Pac-12 from rating the Big 12 a decade and a half ago.
True.
That Larry Scott wasn't willing to allow Texas to have their own network, was that he wanted to have the Pac-12 network and Texas wanted to have their own thing. And if Texas and all those other, was it 6 schools at that point?
So maybe
they would have joined the Pac-12 in 2010. Maybe we should look
back on this and say Dan Beebe was actually chess, not checkers. He saved the Big 12. He didn't kill it with the Longhorn Network. He saved the Big 12.
Yeah, he did.
He actually did.
The last thing that I wanted to mention here, Gabe mentioned it at the start, and I do think that there is an argument back and forth on how national media handled the crumbling of the Big 12 and then the crumbling of the Pac-12. Let me lay out how I see it from the Big 12 point of view, and then Gabe can give his Pac-12 look on this.
Do I get to act like a judge?
Yes, you can act like a judge. Yeah,
right. Do I need to find a gavel or something to bang?
Yeah. So, you can go bang like a Big Ten shirt or something. So here's how I see it. The Big 12 finds out that Oklahoma and Texas are leaving. And obviously there is this panic, whatever. It sets it off like, oh man, this is not good. We're going to have realignment again, but oh man, this is awesome for the SEC. This Texas and OU, they're going into a place that they fit. Like, and it was immediately, hey, the Big 12, all your schools are going to the American Athletic Conference. Like, get cozy with Mike Oresco. You're going to sign a $20 million TV deal with ESPN, and that's your life now. Or, well, some of you guys might be able to go to the Pac-12, but not all of you. Like, only 4 of you. And there was not this big memorial service held for the Big 12, and made it feel like, wow, the Big 12 is gone. And again, we got all the puff pieces about how the Big 12 is dying. They're going to be getting $20 million from the AAC. Nobody felt bad for the Big 12 when this was going on, except for people inside the Big 12 and those like you and I that feel like we would rather have college football aligned the way it was in 2009. Like, that is the form that college football seems best in. It's the Big 10 with 11 teams. It's the Big 12 with 12. It's the Pac-10. You could give them Utah and somebody else if you wanted later on. The SEC and ACC all figured out, but there wasn't this great sadness that seemed to be the next time around and when the Pac-12 started to fall apart. And then in addition to that, part of this is because George Kliavkov was lying about the media deal, so people kept reporting what their Pac-12 sources were saying, but there was always a lot out there that tried to tear down what the Big 12 did TV-wise, and that, hey, the Pac-12 is going to be fine. They're going to do this. They're going to get this done. They're going to come out better, and they're always the better option until they weren't, and then everybody was crying and saying, oh, we can't have the death of West Coast football. This is so sad. This is so sad. And in reality, West Coast football is not going away. We just don't have to watch the 4 schools that we weren't watching to begin with Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, and Washington State. And it sucks. It's not fun that the Pac-12 is losing and dying. I'm not saying that we should not shed a tear for the Pac-12. But what I am saying is that those tears were nowhere to be found for the Big 12 when all anybody ever told the Big 12 schools is that you were going to be in the American Athletic Conference. And not the Big 12 was going to take the AAC. It was that the Big 12 was going to have their schools go to the AAC, and K-State was going to have to go on the road to South Florida, and KU was going to have to go play at Tulsa for conference games and football and basketball, and it was just ridiculous when people were putting that out there. It did not feel like, from a Big 12 perspective, that anybody had any ounce of sympathy for the league, and that it was more so, them's the breaks. And then the Pac-12 thing comes around. Everybody's disseminating George Kliavkov's lies about the TV deal, and they ultimately end it by, this is really sad. This is really sad for the sport. And it no doubt is, but it was also really sad for the sport when it looked like the Big 12 was going to die and OU and Texas left.
The defendant can now
no
give
more
his,
questions, Your Honor.
Your Honor,
can now give
Your
his
Honor,
case.
Representing the West Coast and Pac-12 football and in memoriam, I would like to present the evidence that if Mason would like to claim that Pac-12 football and the West Coast football isn't dead, but just that a couple of schools that nobody cares about are being left behind, well, respectfully, that's probably what was going to happen to the Big 12. You could have had those schools do the exact same thing, and we could have done a prisoner swap the opposite way, and there would have been a couple leftovers. Texas Tech, yeah, we probably could have done without them. Like, who's really gonna lose out there? Like West Virginia. Oh, you know what? If they're not a part of the Big 12 anymore, if we send K-State, KU, TCU, Baylor, Oklahoma State, if we send them to the Pac-12, are we really gonna lose out? Like, that's what would happen. And you can say it felt like everyone was cheering on the death. I know what it felt like this entire last 2 weeks. It definitely felt like a lot of people rooting for a death. And you know what happened? People rooted for it so hard it actually happened, unlike the Big 12. So respectfully, I actually do think, for all the pondering and posturing that the media sources do, and everyone being like, oh, George was lying. George was saying that he got a bet, that he had a good deal and it was all going to be good in the end, and all this kind of yada, yada, yada. You know what? Every time that there's a TV negotiation, or every time that there's a contract negotiation between a baseball agent and a player and a team, you know what happens? People posture. Teams put out reports. I'm listening right now to the Chris Jones stuff and the Chiefs, and you can hear on one side people being like, it sounds like they're really far apart on the deal. And on the other side, you hear from people, from sources, ESPN people, who very clearly are talking to the Chiefs, being like, you know what? We feel really good that we're going to get a deal done. And all of it is posturing. All of it is posturing. You would lie too if you were trying to create negotiating leverage. So I don't blame people for saying things. Like, I don't blame George Kliavkov for claiming that he was having good posturing. I blame dumb people, dumb media members.
But do you at least blame him for lying as big and as hard as he did? Like, he made it seem like they were going to get this great deal. He said at one point, we'll eventually catch, USC and UCLA. He made it seem like, oh yeah, we'll be fine. And then the deal he presented was well under the Big 12, and they were going to have to hit some astronomical numbers for an additional streaming service,
Your Honor,
to get people in.
Your Honor, I did not interrupt when the plaintiff.
No, you did not.
I'm not defending.
I don't know how to stop.
I'm not defending.
Order
I'm not defending my client for lying about or being delusional. Excuse me, for being delusional.
Sounds like libel, Your Honor.
His ability to get a deal done. But I will just say everybody rooted for the death of one or the other. People were fine with one of them dying. And it would have been, I think that if we had ended up in a world where that beautiful, the best logo in conference sports, the wave with the mountain and the Pac-12 crescent could have just been edited to say Pac-16 or Pac-18, I would have been fine with it. And now everybody's like, everybody being like, the Big 12 people are like, go play with the AAC. All I'm hearing right now is that Cal and Stanford and Oregon State and Wazoo need to go beg their way into the Mountain West. So
the difference with that is Oregon State is not Kansas and Oregon State is not Oklahoma State. Like
Stanford is the best athletic department in the country.
Oh God. Okay. I think our judge here is a little too close to the situation, so he will probably echo the same sentiments. But Your Honor, the defense here would like to propose a settlement, and that is we just put this matter to bed, and we both agree that 4 of those former Pac-12 schools come and join the Big 12. 2 of them go to the Big 10. And we're all happy because our schools are safe for the time being, and we are at least in somewhat of a version of that still matters.
We'll reconvene in 2033.
No, I'm gonna rule. After hearing 2 compelling cases from the prosecution and the defense teams here, I am going to decide.
I think it was just 2 defense teams. Respectfully.
Yeah, we were both defensive. I mean, we were both in that position.
I am going to side with. I am going to side with the Pac-12 on this.
Of course.
But let me explain why. Let me explain why. The reason I'm going to side with the Pac-12, and while I do think that they were pompous and thought that they were too good to add Big 12 programs back when Texas and Oklahoma left, and I think that is quite frankly the reason why the Pac-12 is probably dying and not the Big 12 is dying. The Big 12 schools that were told that like, you're going to go play in the American, or the American is going to absorb those schools. Those schools are the exact same as the 4 that are now left in the Pac-4 or whatever you want to call it. And I have no idea what those 4 schools are going to be or would have been. But I also think that it's really sad to think about the fact that the Pac-12 had been around, I think, since like 1915. And the Big 12 obviously hasn't been around for as long as the Pac-12 has.
Real quick, for the audio only listeners, I just wiped some tears away, and then Gabe gave the double birds to me. So we may be conference mates next year, but we aren't
yet. The Big
yet.
16 is going to have some crazy new rivalries. So starting with number 1, ASU in West Virginia.
Here's the other thing that makes me side with the Pac-12 is, in this argument's sake, is that the Big 12 was routinely pushed closer and closer and closer to the edge, but it was never actually pushed off the edge of the cliff. The Pac-12 was pushed off the edge of the cliff. So I think that there would have been an equal level of sadness. What was that?
He said you shouldn't have been standing there.
I think that there would have been an equal level of sadness had certain Big 12 schools been, for lack of a better term, relegated to a group of 5 or a lower level conference. And we just never got a chance to actually see that because the conference didn't die, because they hired good leadership and because they made effective and smart strategic decisions behind Brett Yormark and as a conference presidents and chancellors committee to not allow that to happen. And I also would like to say here one final thing here. The Big 12 knew how to react when Texas and Oklahoma left because they had at one point lost 6 of their original 12 members to other conferences. The Pac-12 had no idea how to react when USC and UCLA left because they had never
done anything other than add.
Yes, yeah. And they had never even considered the possibility of any of their members leaving for another conference because geography had always mattered. in college sports. And that obviously doesn't matter anymore with what the Big Ten has done. And to another extent, the Big 12 has done with, obviously West Virginia and Arizona schools being in the same conference. And I think that you combine all those different things. And another reason why I think that the Big 12 was able to survive is because the 8 schools that were left in the Big 12 are all very similar, like-minded institutions. From an academic perspective, from an athletic goals perspective, they're all very similar.
AAU.
Kansas State is very similar to Texas Tech. Iowa State's very similar to Baylor. Now, obviously, there's some politics there that make them.
You look at it. K-State, Oklahoma State, and Iowa State are like the exact same school.
But there is
every like rung of the ladder. They are the
but
exact
there is
same.
no similarity between Cal, Stanford, USC, UCLA, and the other 8 schools that really made it.
UCLA and UC Berkeley are both UC institutions.
No. What I was going to say is those 4 schools are all like very like-minded academically, but the other 8 schools that I think made up the Pac-12 are very different. Like they have different goals and different ideologies, whereas the 8 schools in the Pac-12, in the Big 12 that were left over after Texas and Oklahoma left, were all very similar. I think there was different goals amongst the remaining schools in the Pac-12, and I think that's part of the reason why it's now the Pac-4. And at the end of the day, my final thoughts on all this, I'm sad this is happening. I'm actually very upset it's all happening. I don't think it's good for the fans, but it's okay to have that opinion and also be excited for the opportunity that we're going to get to see more exciting helmet matchups every Saturday.
I would, I'll real quick, I'll go and then I'll let Gabe finish us off. Here's what I think is essentially the Big 12 already had its death and funeral in 2010 when that was the last year of all 12 teams together. And then 2011, Nebraska and Colorado were gone. And then 2012, Missouri and A&M were gone. So the Big 12 already had their true like mourning period where it was, we just lost schools that had been integral to this league since we all got together in the mid 90s. And for some of them, in the case of Missouri and Colorado and Nebraska, you lost almost half of the original Big 8 right there. And that's something that mattered a lot to anybody that was a part of the original Big 8. Like that was significant. I mean, Oklahoma lost their biggest rival next to Texas in Nebraska and a ton of history there. Colorado and Nebraska, they both left the same conference for different ones, and that ripped apart a rivalry that had developed there, and there was history. K-State and Nebraska, like there are just so many of these things. KU and Missouri is just gone like that, and like that's an unfortunate thing. And it's one of those deals where, like, I think why it's different now for the Big 12 is the Big 12 at least got to have their serious, like, we just lost our dad type moment in 2010, whereas now they're just kind of going through, great grandpa, he's 98 years old. He was on life support. Like he's just sitting in his chair, all peeing his pants in the retirement home. Like it's fine that he's out of his misery now. Whereas the Pac-12, like they just lost their mom and dad in like a surprise car crash at 38 years old. And now you've got these kids who are like, what do we do? Those are really bad analogies, but I'm just trying to like find something here. Like
I think I won the analogy.
We're an hour into this. They got to catch somebody's attention.
And then
Gabe's really good at analogies. It's
I was going to say also, you talked about the Big 12 pushing the Pac-12 off the ledge. I was going to view it more like when you're like right next to like a mountainous hill or something, and it says be wary of falling rock. The Big 12 was just like driving on the road like 20 feet away from it, and the rock comes tumbling down and just takes them out of nowhere. Whereas the Pac-12 had been standing right underneath the sign, looking straight up for however long, like just daring the rock to fall on them. And then it fell on him like, oh man, it's really sad that guy died. And it's like, he's an idiot. He should have died 10 years ago.
No. It's like standing, looking up at the falling rock. And then as the rock starts to roll, you like move away, but you still stick your leg out just to see if you can get it again. And then you fall off the cliff because of it. My last and parting thought is this. Now that the Pac-12 has died, now that everyone has gotten what they wanted in the Midwest and the East Coast, because I won that argument and everyone was rooting for the demise of West Coast football. Can we all, in an alliance here, agree?
Can we look each other in the eye?
Can we look each other in the eye? We don't need to write any papers and sign anything, but can we all look each other in the eye and pledge that we will watch the Pac-12 this year because it has
Buddy,
the best.
I don't need to pledge. I already do.
It has the best quarterback play, and it should be the most entertaining conference, top to middle.
Here's what I will say. I will watch members of the 12 this upcoming year.
Mason, your daughter is going to keep you up to all hours of the night.
Let me
watch a lot of Pac-12
Let
football.
me do this real quick. We are 23 days away from some teams kicking off. It's time for the Big 12 scoreboard. Thursday, August 31st, 7 p.m., Florida at Utah. A big-time matchup between the SEC and future crown jewel of the Big 12 Conference, the Utes. Later that same
you're calling
night,
them the crown jewel?
Hey, they are going to be
That's
up there.
Big of you. That's big of you.
I'm trying to hand out all of
Kyle Whittingham has got a storm coming, boy.
At 9 p.m., none of us in Big 12 country are going to be able to watch our Sun Devils play Southern Utah because it's 9 o'clock on Pac-12 Network.
Is that the Dilly debut?
We'll find a way. Yes, it is. And then, just a preview of what's to come. Big nude kickoff on Saturday, September 2nd, 11 a.m. Fox. Colorado at TCU. Coach Prime going to get his butt kicked because he's a fraud.
Conference
and then,
rivals.
Again, Big 12 battle. Arizona hosts Northern Arizona, 9 p.m. Pac-12 Network that night. That is your Big 12 scoreboard.
They're not going to lose that game.
Hey,
I don't know enough about Northern Arizona. By the way, let's talk real quick football point. Speaking of Colorado, a tweet came across my timeline this morning. Shedeur Sanders has apparently thrown 22 or 25 touchdowns in training camp and 0 interceptions. So be scared, America.
Wow. What are the chances?
Well, hey, I've heard a lot about fake news coming out of the Pac-12. So be wary of media reports. So
yeah, seriously.
Probably right.
Colorado is not going to be good this year.
Don't take anything we just said this last hour 11 seriously, because it could all change by tomorrow if the ACC finally gets out of their crappy grant of rights deal. That'll do it for me, Mason Voth, as well as Alec Busse and Gabe Swartz. And you can follow along with all of us at either EMAW Online or the Hoosier, and also on the Twitter handles that you see on the video below our names as well.